Greybridge never sleeps. It just changes its kind of noise. One night, it's the whisper of deals made behind closed doors. The next, it's sirens echoing through fog that smells like gasoline and regret. But that night, it was fire. St. Michael's Church, a safe place in a city that forgot what safety meant, was burning like every sin I'd ever tried to forget. I stood across the street, rain soaking through my coat, watching the flames climb higher than the steeple ever reached. They said the gas line burst. Accident, they called it. But I've seen enough accidents in this town to know when one's been written by human hands.
Help me!
Inside those walls was Father Quinn. He wasn't just a priest. He was something better. A man who saw what was left of me and thought it was still worth saving. Back when I had nothing but bad habits and worse company, he gave me a bed, a prayer, and a reason to try. Now, he was gone. A good man in a city that punishes the good for staying that way. The cops worked fast. They always do when it's too late. I watched the yellow tape go up, watched faces turn away from the heat, and waited for the moment when the noise died down. When it did, I slipped through the smoke. The place smelled like judgment, ash, varnish, and the ghosts of old hymns. The walls were black bones now, the pews half melted together. And yet, under all that ruin, something still breathed. I don't know what drew me deeper, habit maybe or guilt looking for a place to land. Either way, I found myself in Father Quinn's office, or what was left of it. The desk was half gone. Everything charred except for a corner of a book peeking out from under the rubble. I pulled it free, half burned, but still readable. A ledger, names, numbers, dates. Every page was a confession written in ink. Judges, businessmen, cops, people who looked cleaner on paper than they did in truth. And then, one name stopped me cold. Mine. Underlined twice. Like Father Quinn had wanted to make sure I didn't miss it. I don't remember sitting down, but I did, right there in the ashes, staring at that word, Marlowe. My name written by a dead man. Maybe he was trying to warn me. Maybe he was trying to save me one last time. Or maybe he finally realized I was never worth saving at all. The rain outside softened the edges of the sirens. For a second, it almost sounded peaceful. I slipped the ledger into my coat and walked back through the ruins. When I stepped outside, the fire was dying, but the smell, that stayed. Smoke, faith, and something uglier underneath. I lit another cigarette and watched the smoke twist into the night. It looked a lot like the kind that crawls out of a confession booth. The kind that doesn't rise, it just lingers. I didn't tell the cops about the ledger. Didn't tell anyone. You don't hand over something like that in Greybridge. Not unless you want it to vanish, and maybe yourself with it. That night, I didn't go home. I drove aimlessly, through neighborhoods that used to know me, past bars that still would. The city looked quieter, but that's just what guilt looks like under streetlights. When I finally parked, I just sat there, listening to the rain hit the roof like a heartbeat that wouldn't quit. I thought about Father Quinn, the way he said my name like it still meant something, and I thought about whoever had cut that gas line. You can call it curiosity or maybe something uglier, but I knew I wasn't walking away from this. The fire wasn't finished. It just changed homes. And this time, it was burning in me. Greybridge has a funny way of keeping its ghosts close. Some cities let you forget. This one likes to remind you who you used to be, so I made a choice that night, not for justice, not even for redemption, but because Quinn once told me that the truth, no matter how much it hurts, is still better than the dark. He was wrong, but I owed him enough to prove it. They say fire purifies, but in Greybridge, it just hides the evidence. I couldn't sleep after St. Michael's burned. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Father Quinn's hands, steady, deliberate, turning the pages of that same ledger I pulled from the ashes. Names, numbers, lies dressed up as charity, and that last entry, underlined like a signature carved in gilt, my own. I spent the next morning staring at the cover. Half-burned leather, the kind that still smells like smoke long after it's gone out. A piece of the city that refused to die quietly. There were words in the margins, ones Quinn must have written by hand. Short phrases, half of them prayers, the rest warnings. One of them said, "Confess before it's too late." So I did what I've always done when the past comes knocking. I went back to where it all started. St. Michael's was cordoned off, but crime tape's just decoration when nobody's watching. The air still carried the smell of burnt wood and wet plaster. The confessional booths were half collapsed, but one stood mostly upright, like it was stubborn, like Quinn. Inside, I found something that didn't belong to the fire. A small recorder tucked under the bench. Melted a little on one side, but still working. There was a single tape inside, its label smudged but legible enough to read 2 words. For him. I pressed play. Father Quinn's voice. Weary. Breaking between words like each one cost him something. He said, "Forgive me, Lord, for I have buried the truth and the man who once sought it." Then silence. That line stuck in my head like a splinter. The man who once sought it. He was talking about me. I knew it before the words finished echoing. Whatever he buried, I'd already been digging for years without even knowing it. Back at my apartment, I went through the ledger again. Every name, every number. Then I saw it. A pattern in the coded entries, like someone trying to hide a trail but still keep track of it. A name popped up more than once. Russo. Matteo Russo, I knew him. Everyone in Greybridge did. He used to be muscle for a mob boss named Bellamy before he reinvented himself as a businessman. That's what the papers called him now. A clean slate with dirty hands. Next to Russo's name was something stranger. A phrase written in shorthand. Project Halo. Now, in this city, when you see the word project, it usually means construction or destruction dressed up as progress. I didn't know what Halo meant, but when a priest dies and that word shows up in the same breath as mob money, you start to think less about angels and more about devils in disguise. I thought about calling Morris, an old cop buddy who still pretended the badge meant something. But this wasn't his case. This was mine. And something told me it needed to stay that way. I drove across town to what used to be the parish archives. Quinn kept his sermon recordings there. Maybe something survived the fire that the arsonist didn't count on. The building was quiet, too quiet for daylight. I slipped in through a broken side door, one of the perks of being good at bad habits. Inside, the shelves were half collapsed, tapes scattered everywhere like confessions trying to escape. Most of them were sermons. Quinn's voice, calm and certain, preaching to the kind of people who still believed redemption could be bought cheap. But one tape didn't fit. It was marked with a single word. Russo. The recording was warped. Just fragments of his voice and underneath it another. A man's, low, threatening. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I've heard that tone before. the sound of power reminding Faith who really runs the city. Then came a sound I couldn't mistake. A lighter flick, a chair falling, a door slamming. And Quinn saying one last thing before the tape ended. "If he finds this, tell him I kept my promise." Kept his promise to who? To me? To God? Or to someone who made sure he'd never tell? When I stepped outside, the storm had gotten worse. Streetlights blurred in the downpour, and for a moment I thought I saw someone watching me from across the street. A silhouette under an umbrella, face hidden, still as a photograph. I blinked, and they were gone. That's when I knew. Whoever cut that gas line, whoever wanted that church turned to ash, they weren't finished yet. They were still cleaning up. And me? I was next on the list. I walked back to the car, ledger under my arm, and Quinn's last words burning a hole through my thoughts. He said, he buried the truth. But I just dug it up. And in Greybridge, truth has a way of digging back. Morning in Greybridge doesn't look much different from night. Same rain, same smoke, just fewer excuses. I sat in my office staring at the ledger again. Half the pages were burned, but what was left told a story only the guilty could write. Names crossed out, some circled, some underlined twice, like the city kept its own Bible, and these were its commandments. And there it was again, Project Halo. No address, no notes, just money moving in and out of church charities like a tide that never stopped. Quinn must have known. He'd seen it coming. The fire, the cover-up, the rot under the holy paint. I needed someone who still believed in facts, someone who hadn't traded their soul for convenience. There weren't many left, but there was one name I couldn't stop thinking about. Lydia Crane. We'd worked together once, back when I still wore a badge. She was a journalist then, sharp, stubborn, always chasing the kind of stories that got people hurt. We didn't end well. Most good things don't in Greybridge. But if Project Halo touched City Hall, she'd know about it, or at least know where to start digging. So I found myself outside her building that night, watching the glow of her office light through the rain. Old habits die slow, especially the ones that hurt the most. She didn't look surprised to see me, just tired in a way I understood too well. We didn't talk much at first. Didn't have to. Sometimes silence says more than memory ever could. She had papers spread across her desk, photographs, city budgets, faces I recognized but didn't want to, men who smiled for cameras and hid their hands behind their backs. When I told her about Quinn, she didn't flinch. She just nodded, like she'd been waiting for me to bring his name up. Then she showed me what she'd found. Photos. Charity shipments that never made it to their destinations. Money wired through shell companies tied to Bellamy's old network. And there, in the corner of one report, that same phrase again, Project Halo. Lydia said it wasn't just a charity front. It was a smuggling pipeline. People, goods, whatever the city needed to move without questions. And Father Quinn, he'd been the moral cover for it all, or maybe the conscience they had to silence when he tried to shut it down. I asked her how deep it went. She didn't answer, just slid another photo across the desk, me, younger, standing beside Bellamy, smiling like I didn't already have blood on my hands. That was the case that ended my career. A sting operation gone wrong. Drugs, bribes, a setup, and me, the fall guy, because I got too close to the truth. Now I was staring at proof that it hadn't just been bad luck. It had been design. Every move I made back then was just another pawn step in someone else's game. Lydia said she'd been following the trail for months. City contracts, offshore accounts, church donations. Every road led back to Russo. Matteo Russo, Bellamy's old enforcer turned philanthropist. He'd taken over the business after Bellamy's mysterious disappearance. Now he wore suits instead of scars. But under that silk, he was still the same animal. She told me one more thing, something that stuck to me like smoke on skin. Father Quinn had visited her a week before the fire. He'd asked about Bellamy, said he needed to clear his conscience. She thought he was talking about old sins. She didn't realize he was talking about his own execution. I left her office with the rain in my collar and guilt in my chest. We didn't say goodbye. Didn't need to. Some connections never really end. They just go quiet until the next storm. Walking back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that the city was watching me. Not the people, the city itself, like Greybridge, had eyes in the puddles, ears in the wires, a memory for every mistake I'd tried to bury. Quinn's death, the ledger, Lydia's evidence, they were all threads of the same fabric. And at the center of it was Project Halo. Whatever it wasn't done burning. I lit a cigarette and watched the smoke curl around the dashboard light. The rain blurred the windshield, turning the world outside into a watercolor of shadows and neon. Somewhere out there, Russo was sitting on a throne built out of other men's bones. And if he'd had a hand in this, if Quinn had died for trying to stop him, then maybe it was time I started collecting what this city owed me. They say every man has his breaking point. Mine was written in a dead priest's handwriting. And if the truth really does set you free, I had a feeling freedom was going to cost me everything. There's a moment, right before a storm breaks, when the air feels heavy, like the whole city's holding its breath. That's how Greybridge felt that night. Quiet, but not peaceful, just waiting for someone to make the next mistake. I'd been tracing Russo's money for days. Every lead led to another locked door, another false name, another shadow of a shadow. And still, somehow, the trail ended where it always does, with Bellamy's ghost. The man had been dead for 10 years, but his fingerprints were all over Project Halo. You don't erase a man like Bellamy. You just change the address where his evil lives. Russo inherited everything, the money, the connections, the city's bad conscience. Only difference was, he wore it better. A suit, a smile, and just enough charity dinners to keep his halo polished. But halos don't hide horns. I drove out to the docks, Russo's newest development project. A luxury casino being built where Bellamy used to bury his secrets. Nothing like money to wash the blood off the past. The place was crawling with workers even after dark. Men who didn't ask questions as long as the pay kept coming. I slipped around back, past the trucks and generators to a small trailer lit from inside. His office. Through the window, I saw him, Matteo Russo. Older now, but still built like a threat. He was laughing with someone on the phone, and for a second, I almost believed he'd gone legitimate. But then he hung up, and I saw it. The same ledger I'd taken from the church, sitting on his desk. He had it, which meant someone had been in my office, and suddenly the air got thinner. I don't remember deciding to go inside. Some things you don't decide, and they just happen. He looked up and smiled like he'd been expecting me. That kind of smile only comes from men who already think they've won. We talked. Or maybe we didn't. It was less of a conversation and more like chess with knives. He told me he knew about Quinn, about the fire, about the tape. Said I'd been useful, that someone needed to dig the evidence out before it burned completely. Then he leaned forward and said the kind of thing that makes your blood go quiet. He offered me a deal. Help him destroy what was left, the tapes, the files, the ledger, and in return, he'd make sure my name stayed clean. A new start. No questions asked. For a second, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because part of me actually considered it. That's what this city does. It wears you down until the truth sounds heavier than a lie. But then I thought about Quinn, the way his voice cracked on that tape, the way he said he buried the truth to protect the man who once sought it. And I realized he didn't die to keep secrets. He died hoping someone like me still cared enough to tell them. So I told Russo no. He smiled again, same one as before, only colder. Said I was making a mistake. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and told me to go home and forget. When I got back to my place, the door was open. Everything inside was torn apart. Drawers emptied, papers shredded, like a hurricane made of regret had come through. The ledger was gone, and sitting in the middle of my desk was a single item, a priest's collar soaked in rain. They were sending a message, the kind you don't reply to. But I've never been much good at silence. Whoever took that ledger wanted it erased, every name, every sin, every proof that Greybridge was still rotting from the inside out. And now they had it. But what they didn't have was Quinn's voice, that tape, his last confession. It wasn't much, but in this city, sometimes a whisper can be louder than a gunshot. I poured myself a drink, cheap bourbon, same bottle I'd been nursing since the day I quit pretending to believe in redemption. As the glass hit the desk, I noticed a shadow move outside the window. Tall, still, watching. By the time I stood, it was gone. Maybe it was Russo's men, maybe it was guilt. Either way, I knew I didn't have much time. The game had changed. The evidence was gone, the rules were dirtier, but I still had one thing left. The truth. And the only way to keep it alive was to drag it into the light, no matter who burned along the way. Greybridge has a way of eating its own, and if I was next on the menu, so be it. At least this time I'd go down fighting for something that used to matter. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew who I had to see next. Lydia. She deserved to know how deep the rot went, and maybe she could help me dig a little deeper before they buried us both. Greybridge never forgets. It just waits until you think you've outrun it. Then it catches up, slow, patient, like a debt collector with perfect timing. That night, I couldn't stay in my apartment. Whoever ransacked it knew what they were doing. Professional. No fingerprints, no mess, just precision. They didn't take the bourbon, didn't even take the money I kept under the floorboards. They came for one thing, the ledger. And they left that collar behind to remind me why. I drove until the city lights started fading behind me. Didn't have a destination, just needed distance. Distance from the smoke, the lies, and the feeling that every window had eyes. Out past the river, Greybridge gets quiet. Too quiet. Factories turned into skeletons, warehouses waiting to be forgotten. It's where the city hides the things it's ashamed of and the men it's done using. That's where I found Lydia again. She was holed up in an old newspaper press room, a place that used to print truth before truth stopped selling. Stacks of old papers were everywhere, headlines about corruption, reform, hope, ghost stories from a city that stopped believing in heroes. She looked tired. Worse than before. But she was still Lydia. Sharp eyes, steady hands, and a voice that could slice through silence. I told her what happened. About Russo, about the break-in, about the collar. She didn't say much, just nodded, then handed me something wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a copy of a document, one of Quinn's donation records, but edited, rewritten. The original handwriting was his, but someone had added names in a different pen. And at the bottom, a signature that didn't belong. M. Russo. Lydia said she'd been digging deeper, found connections between Project Halo and Bellamy's foundation. Turns out, Halo wasn't a project at all. It was a pipeline. a chain of charities used to move contraband and people, smuggled in under the city's nose and laundered through church donations. Bellamy started it. Russo perfected it. And Quinn, he tried to stop it. When he realized what charity money was really funding, he confronted them, and they burned him for it. I stared at the paper until the ink started to blur. It wasn't just corruption, it was a machine. And we'd both just pulled one too many wires. That's when we heard it. Someone was coming. 2 men, maybe 3. Slow, deliberate. Lydia froze. I motioned for her to stay quiet. They didn't knock. Didn't have to. The door came down with one kick. I saw the first man, dark coat, earpiece, gun out but steady. Not cops. Russo's men. We slipped out the back. Old habit. Every press room has a back door, a way to get the truth out when someone wants it buried. We ran through the alley, past dumpsters, fire escapes, the city stretching above us like a concrete cage. I could hear them behind us, boots slapping against wet asphalt, their shouts echoing through the walls. We ducked behind an old delivery truck. I could feel my heart trying to outrun the storm. Lydia whispered something I almost didn't catch. She said, "We can't run forever." And she was right. I told her to find Morris, the one honest cop I still trusted, and give him the copy of the records. If I didn't make it, he'd know what to do. She hesitated. Then she kissed me once. Quick. Like punctuation at the end of something too long left unsaid. Then she was gone. I waited a few seconds, then stepped out into the open. The men were still searching. I let them see me, let them follow. If they wanted the truth, they could chase it. Right into the fire. They followed me through the docks, through the smoke, until the whole night blurred into rain and adrenaline. One of them got close. Too close. And I saw his face for half a second, a scar down his jaw, and around his neck, a priest's collar. Not Quinn's, a different one. You don't forget a face like that. He didn't talk much, but before he went down, he said something I'll never forget. He said, "The Father forgives. The city doesn't." Then he was gone. I stood there, soaked to the bone, looking out over the black water. Somewhere in that darkness, the ledger was still out there. Maybe Russo had it. Maybe someone higher up did. Didn't matter. The point wasn't finding it anymore. The point was why it existed. Why Quinn had written my name in it. Why he'd tried to warn me. He wasn't accusing me. He was asking me to finish what he couldn't. And maybe, for the first time, I finally understood what faith really meant. Not praying to be saved, but standing in the fire, knowing you won't be. The city felt different that night. Colder. Like it knew I'd made up my mind. No more running, no more hiding. It was time to pay a visit to the devil himself. There's a moment in every night where the city feels like it's holding its breath. Right before dawn, right before the cops change shifts and the drunks start finding their way home. That's when I drove back into Greybridge. The rain hadn't stopped. It never does when you need it to. I didn't have a plan. Plans get you killed in this line of work. All I had was a name, a gun, and the feeling that I was walking into something I'd been headed toward my whole life. Russo's casino had been gutted years ago, after Bellamy's reform campaign went up in flames. Now it was just bones, an empty husk of neon, scaffolding, and ghosts. He'd set up shop there again, like some kind of twisted nostalgia trip. A man rebuilding his empire out of ash and memory. Inside, the place smelled of smoke, mold, and old lies. You could still see the outlines on the walls where the slot machines used to be and the faded murals of angels with missing wings. I walked through the darkness, following the hum of generators and the faint buzz of a single light. And there he was, Matteo Russo, sitting behind what used to be the cashier's cage, like a preacher in his own kind of church. He looked older, thinner, but his eyes were still the same, sharp, unblinking, like a man who'd already made peace with hell. He smiled when he saw me, didn't even flinch, like he'd been expecting me all along. He didn't need to say anything. I could see the truth in the way he leaned back, calm, confident, untouchable. He had the ledger. I could see it sitting right there on the desk, a little water-warped from the fire, but still breathing. I asked him why. Why kill Quinn? Why torch the church? Why drag me back into this mess? He just shrugged, like it was business. Said Bellamy had started something that needed to be finished. Said Quinn was weak. Said the city needed men like him, men who could make the dirty choices others were too scared to. I told him he was wrong, that Quinn died trying to clean the stain, that men like Russo were the reason it would never wash out. He laughed, soft, almost pitying, said I'd always been naive, said even Quinn knew that sin was currency in this town, and we'd all been paying with borrowed money. I stepped closer. The air between us felt heavy. You could smell the oil on his gun. He reached for it slowly, like a magician showing the audience the trick. I told him to stop. He didn't. So I fired first. He slumped forward without a sound. The ledger fell from the table like it had been waiting to drop. For a long minute, I just stood there, watching the blood mix with the rain on the floor, thinking about Quinn, about Lydia, about all the men who thought they could play God in a city that never believed in one. I picked up the ledger, flipped through its pages, Bellamy, Quinn Russo, half the city's soul scribbled in ink and gilt, and at the bottom of the last page, my own name, underlined twice. That's when it hit me. Maybe I wasn't the one chasing the truth. Maybe the truth had been chasing me. I'd been running from my own shadow since the day I quit the force, trying to drown the past in whiskey and cigarette smoke. But no matter how far you drive, the rearview mirror always catches up. I left Russo where he fell. Didn't bother calling it in. No one would care. Not the cops, not the papers, not the people. Greybridge doesn't mourn its monsters. It just buries them and moves on to the next one. Outside, the rain had softened, the kind of drizzle that feels almost gentle, like the city was finally tired too. I could hear the river down below, black and endless. For a second, I thought about tossing the ledger in, letting it sink, ending the whole damn thing right there. But then I thought of Quinn, his voice in that old confession booth. Forgive me, Lord, for I have buried the truth and the man who once sought it. He wasn't talking about himself, he was talking about me. So I didn't throw it away, I kept it, because some truths don't deserve to drown, they deserve to burn. The night stretched on forever after that, streetlights blinking out one by one as I drove, the city fading behind me. They say redemption's for the living. But some of us don't want redemption. We just want to understand why the world keeps spinning, even when everything good in it stops. And maybe that's enough to keep driving, to keep remembering, to keep the fire alive, just long enough for someone else to see the smoke. Morning always comes too early in Greybridge. Not because the night ends, but because you're never ready for what daylight shows you. The rain had finally stopped by the time I hit the bridge out of downtown. Sky was the color of a bruise, soft purple and gray bleeding into each other, like the city itself was trying to forget what happened. I pulled over halfway across and killed the engine. The river below looked calm, like glass if you didn't look too close. Funny how still water hides the deepest things. The ledger sat on the passenger seat beside me, torn, burned at the edges, but alive. Every page was a heartbeat of this city. Its deals, its sins, its ghosts. I thought about dropping it, just letting it slip out the window and vanish under the surface. But then again, the river had swallowed enough truth for one lifetime. So I sat there, smoking the last cigarette in the pack, watching the sun fight its way through the clouds and thinking about everyone who didn't make it this far. Quinn, the priest who believed redemption could be ledgered and balanced. Russo, the devil who thought he could buy his way into heaven. And Lydia, who probably made it out of the city before sunrise. She always was smarter than me. The thing about Greybridge is, it never changes. Not really. You clean up one corner, another starts rotting. You expose one truth, 3 more crawl out of the dark. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel angry about it. Just tired, like maybe the city didn't need saving. Maybe it just needed someone to remember it for what it was. And that someone was me. I opened the glove box and pulled out an old cassette recorder. Same one I used back on the force. Still worked. Mostly. I started talking. Not to anyone in particular, just to the city, to the ghosts, to whoever would dig this thing up years from now and wonder what the hell happened here. I told the story from the beginning. Every name, every scar, every mistake. I didn't spare myself either. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the truth doesn't clean you. It doesn't absolve you. It just sits beside you in the dark and makes sure you don't forget. I finished the tape, popped it out, and slipped it inside the ledger. 2 records, one written in blood, the other in voice. Then I drove back into the city. Didn't know where I was going. Didn't care. Maybe I'd find Lydia. Maybe I'd find another case, or maybe I'd just fade into the cracks, like so many others before me. But as I passed St. Michael's, the one place where all this began, I saw something that stopped me. The church was still a ruin, blackened stone, shattered glass, but someone had left a single candle burning in the doorway. Fresh wax, still warm. Someone still believed. Maybe Quinn's ghost. Maybe someone new. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. Faith isn't about churches or ledgers or forgiveness. It's about not giving up, even when you know the ending. So, I kept driving. Past the church, past the river, past everything I couldn't fix. The city shrank behind me, but it didn't feel like escape this time. It felt like release. They say there's no happy endings in Greybridge. Maybe they're right, but there are honest ones. And maybe that's enough, because in the end, all we really leave behind are the ashes and the story of how we burned.